as we explore our topic, is OEE the right metric to drive a more efficient plant? In today's session, we're going to discuss several situations where focusing on improving your OEE score can negatively impact your productivity or profitability. The two voices you will hear today are myself, Terry DiPasquale, and that of Dennis Coco, the president and founder of 10 and 6. A couple of quick notes for today's webinar. To keep on schedule and respect everyone's time, there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the session. We do ask that all attendees remain on mute and use the chat feature to type in any questions you may have. Also note that we will be recording today's session. Before we jump into today's topic, I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to 10 and 6 for those that may not know us. So the 10 and 6 production management system, we position it as a high feature, low cost, automated production management system. People often ask, where does the name 10 and 6 come from? It comes from the idea of helping our customers drive a 10% efficiency improvement in 6 months. And we do that by driving awareness and accountability to the critical issues in your manufacturing process. Whoops. Just in terms of who some of our customers are, we're heavily in tier 1 and 2 automotive manufacturing, so parts, suppliers, and makers. We're also in general manufacturing, from hearing aid batteries that are made by the thousands a minute to air quality systems, and of course in food and beverage, in some dairy, and I love the cakery because I love cake. The thing to note about all these customers, they're all using the same software from 10 and 6. It's very, well, I'm getting feedback. Sorry about that, folks. It's very flexible to configure to the unique line layouts and setups of our customers, but when we come up with new features and upgraded capabilities, all of our customers can take advantage of those out in the field. What we help our customers with are 3 main areas of their operation. Where we started and grew up, we're going to talk about OEE today, is around improving efficiency. So the efficiency module, doing daily and weekly production morning, real-time status of how you're doing with your production, tracking all of your losses, whether they're downtime or parts not available, etc. And on calls to make sure that the operators get the assistance they need from other departments, and constraint manager, which we'll touch on a little bit in today's presentation. From there, we grew into helping our customers improve quality in their operations, from full traceability down to the lot number or serialized unit level with track and trace, visual inspection for visually inspecting parts, things like dashboards and seats and other interiors fit with this well or are used by our customers for that, and dashboard or windshields as well. Complete paperless quality with our scheduled checks, whether it's startup checks, first off checks, every hourly checks, etc. Making sure those checks are completed in specification, etc., as well as automated SPC charting of those quality check results. And finally, overall helping with the manufacturing operation, from issues tracker for those higher level issues or ongoing issues you're trying to solve, where you might have a multi-department Kaizen or improvement team working on trying to solve issues. Schedule execution to make sure that the latest version of the schedule is communicated to the shop floor in real time so they're producing the right parts. And analytics to identify the chronic issues in your environment to focus your limited improvement resources on, and then an operator console to bring all of these modules together, and of course real-time feedback. It may seem like a lot of capabilities we're providing, and it is, but most of our customers start with 1 or 2 modules that meet a specific business need that they have and have a very defined payback, but they know they're embarking down this path with a solution that can meet many other needs in their environment. And so as they become comfortable with the solution and have other needs, it's easy to add in different modules later. So that's everything I'm going to share with you about 10 and 6. And I'll just jump into today's topic and hand it over to Dennis after that. So I think as everyone on the call will know, the term OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, has become pretty standard across manufacturing and is accepted as a good measure of plant performance and how we're doing. Excuse me. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about some of the challenges to using OEE as a measure of an efficient plant and discuss some specific cases where this metric can incent the wrong behaviors. We're not suggesting you throw out OEE, but again, we're going to highlight situations where if you focus exclusively on your OEE score, you can be doing the wrong things for profitability of your plant. So today we're going to talk about additional metrics to OEE that are essential to driving the right behaviors for that efficient plant. So I'm going to pass it over to Dennis Coco, who will discuss a few examples where OEE doesn't tell the full story. Dennis, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry, and thank you everyone for joining. I know you guys have a busy schedule, so we really appreciate you taking the time today. So let me start by quickly talking and reviewing the OEE formula. It's sometimes considered a complex formula because there's an element of the performance, the availability, and the quality all factored in. And there can be a lot of arguments as to what deems the performance and what part of your production is factory or availability. So, but in its simplest terms, really what we're talking about here is just a simple percentage of the net good pieces produced divided by how many parts you should have produced during the productive time of the shift. You can debate what part goes to performance and what part goes to availability, but essentially it all boils down to net good pieces produced during the time you were supposed to produce. So let's talk about a few scenarios, as Terry mentioned, where the OEE actually might cause you to do the wrong things when you look at efficiency in the plant. One of those is that OEE by itself doesn't factor in manpower in any way. So if you were to look at a cell that's designed to run with 3 people, and today only 2 people show up for work to run that cell. Well, if you wanted to run a better OEE score, you're probably going to try to borrow staff from another area. You're going to disrupt their processes, and you're going to stumble along with a new person that doesn't necessarily know that machine, and maybe achieve an 80% OEE score with the 3 people. However, to run more efficiently, you might have been better off to stay with the 2 people you have, don't disrupt other processes in your plant, slow down the rate of the machine, and maybe achieve a 60% OEE score with just the 2 people. Now, why would I say that? Well, first of all, you're looking at your labor hours, total labor hours, and how much it costs per piece that you manufacture. So we're going to recommend that you track units per labor hour as an additional metric. The other thing we would recommend is that you consider dynamically adjusting your performance targets based on how many people are actually staffing the line. So maybe you do have a lower target when you run with 2 people and a higher target when you run with 3 people, and then keeping in check the units per labor hour as a way of validating that you're doing the right things. So if we were to use that example, let's say your target production is 60 seconds per piece. That's supposed to be 480 pieces per shift, factoring in a $27 per hour burdened labor rate. Between the 2 scenarios, one would cost you $1.69 per piece in labor costs, and the slower machine, the running at a lower rate, actually labor costs. So effectively, you saved money by running at a lower OEE target. Terry, can you mute, please?
It's actually not me. It's muted now.
Okay, sorry. So again, one of our customers, actually some of our customers, are moving towards this type of model where they tie in directly to their attendance tracking systems, their time clock systems, whether it's Kronos or ADP.
Can you go back one slide, please?
Yes.
Hold on, I just looking at, okay. No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. So actually what our customers are doing is tying into their attendance tracking systems and getting real-time visibility right at the start of the shift. They can see who's clocked in and who hasn't clocked in. So if someone's expected in a certain area and they haven't clocked in yet, they're still dimmed out at the start of the shift. So immediately the supervisors know that they're running that shift with one less person than they need. At this point, they can make decisions about moving someone from another area. The blue people are extra staff, so they might be able to move people around. And then they can dynamically adjust. The system will dynamically adjust based on how many people have attended. They'll change the target rate for their OEE for that shift for that cell. Now, you may not always have the luxury of slowing down a machine, but when you can, this is probably a good way to handle this. Also, if you are overstaffed, you don't want to be still measuring to the typical OEE target when you have extra staff. You might want to bump up your target because you should be able to produce, or move that person somewhere else so they can be more effective in the plant. So this is a trend we're seeing, probably driven a lot by the issues with the COVID vaccines coming out. Maybe that'll help, but we are seeing fewer and fewer people showing up per shift. And it's really difficult for our customers to juggle people around at that start of shift and figure out who's showed up and who hasn't showed up and try to make these real-time decisions. So tools like this have been very helpful. So let's talk about another scenario. When you start trying to track OEE, people are going to learn ways to cheat the system. And one easy way to cheat the system is to manipulate your ideal cycle time. Make your target easier to hit so you can have a better OEE score. Okay. The cheat doesn't help you make your plant more efficient. It just improves your score. So how do we, or what do we recommend here? Our recommendation is to let the system do the work for you and determine what the proper target should be. What we mean by that is we have collected data about the performance of each machine and each cell based on what products it's running. And what we can do is determine from all that data we've collected, what is your best sustained rate? What by a sustained rate, we mean 60 minutes or more of continual production. We find that best rate that you ever achieved with the machine for every part you run. That should be the target for your ideal production rate. That should be what your 100% OEE score should be. And then what we do is we create a percentage of your best rate versus what your current ideal rate settings are, and present that to you in a simple metric here that you can see. And it'll aggregate across all products that you run how easy your target is. The higher the number, the easier your target is to hit, which means you're kind of cheating the system. What this ends up doing is normalizing production across all your cells and across all your products. So you get rid of that debate where I often hear, well, that department gets a better OEE score because their targets are too easy to hit. By using a metric like this, you can eliminate that conversation. You can also normalize your production across different plants to make sure that whatever machines you're running, you're setting the ideal target to what the best performance of the machine can be. In this particular example, injection 3 is one of the poorest performing machines, and it has the easiest targets to hit. So in reality, this 66% OE should be more like somewhere in the 50s if they adjusted their targets to be more in line with what the machine is capable of producing. So let's take a look at another way that we see people trying to cheat the system, and that is by removing the amount of time in a shift that is considered to be productive. We call that a no demand state. So let's look at a scenario here where you have a machine that breaks down in the afternoon, second half of the shift. You call for maintenance and maintenance says they can't come out. So what happens then? Instead of taking the hit on the OEE score, people just put the machine into a no demand state and say, oh, well, we got no more production for the rest of the shift. And they cheat the system by not measuring the last half of the shift. So again, the cheat doesn't make your cell more efficient. It just improves your OEE score. Our recommendation on here is that, yes, there are going to be cases where you need to be able to put the machine into a no demand state, but you have to require a supervisor level security clearance in order to do that. That way, you can't just game the score whenever you feel like it and start removing productive time from the shift. As you can see from our hourly production control board here, where you have your hourly targets and you're tracking your good pieces and your variance, by placing, in this case, we had 2 instances of downtime, one for 3.2 minutes and one for 12.5 minutes. The reason codes that were entered here are planned downtimes, circle meeting and PM activities. Those 15.7 minutes were actually removed from the target, and you can see that the hourly target for that hour dropped as a result. So this is a case where there may be legitimate reasons to put the machine into a no demand state, but you certainly should require supervisor approval to do that. Otherwise, people will cheat the system if they get a chance to. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Terry, and he's going to talk you through a few more scenarios.
All right, thanks for that, Dennis. All right, I'm going to talk through a couple more scenarios here where OEE doesn't tell the full story. Scenario here, maybe you decide to run the entire week or the entire month's demand in the first day of the week or the first few days of the month for a specific part number to avoid changeovers. And so the idea is a lot of plants to get a better OEE score might err on the side of larger batch sizes. So you're trying to avoid changeovers. And if you don't have the luxury of dedicated lines or equipment for each part number, which a lot of plants don't, you really need to manage your schedule so that your output matches demand. So you're not just building inventory and then missing deliveries on another part number. And so you can't really ignore changeover times. And I don't think anyone out there is ignoring them, but ignoring the opportunity to improve them if you're not able to measure them effectively. So the recommendation is to get better at changeover execution, and step one is track your changeovers, know how you're doing, set targets for improvement. And so I'll give an example here of a customer, and I'll say this customer hadn't put a lot of focus into changeovers for a while, but when they started measuring it, this is a couple years ago, starting in July, as soon as they started measuring it, over the first few weeks of measuring it, with some fits and starts, they started improving simply by having a focus on, guys, we need to improve our changeover times. Hey, we're averaging just less than 50 minutes. Let's work on it. But as they started to measure more and saw that certain shifts were making changeovers more effectively than others, they started to look at the behaviors and habits and process that was being followed, and they refined the steps of their changeovers, and over the course of a few months, dramatically reduced their average changeover time. Now, I'm not implying that most customers will cut their changeover time by a fifth, but certainly that there's opportunity to squeeze out minutes of production or lost production by improving your changeover times. And again, making it easier to match your production output to your demand while still maintaining a reasonable OEE target. And again, rather than just running the same product for 3 days and getting a great OEE score, but getting behind on other orders. So again, not rocket science, but again, something that if you don't have a system that can help you measure changeovers, it may not be easy for you to do this. The second scenario I'm going to talk about is that we're running really well, but maybe I'm not making the right product. So I'm humming along with great OEE score, but I'm running product A and either missing deliveries or getting close to missing deliveries on product B. So I don't know what it's like in your plants, but we see in a lot of plants that the schedule makes its way to the shop floor on paper that comes out at the beginning of the shift. I've seen updates to the schedule delivered to the shop floor on a sticky note put on the HMI or the screen that the operator works from. And I see that in more plants than you might think. So what we recommend to run more efficiently is to synchronize your scheduling with your plant floor activity to make sure you're running the right parts. And we recommend doing that electronically so that in real time, if the planning or scheduling department makes an update to the schedule, that in real time, that change is reflected down to the shop floor. And so an example here of running the wrong product, and I'm just going to pause for a second here for those that don't know 10 and 6 and talk about this screen. Dennis showed it earlier. This is the operator screen that they would see out at their workstation every day, and it's showing hour by hour how they're doing with production. It's got their and on call buttons at the bottom left if they need to call maintenance or call quality or call a team leader. And we won't touch on that too much today, but we can track response times and what the follow-up was and things like that as well. But up here on the top right, it's showing in the red that they're running order number 10,005 and they are overproducing on it. Now the operator would have been alerted with this going yellow when they were getting close to finishing the order. Now it's in red. You can certainly have alerting and alarming in the background for a supervisor or someone in scheduling to know that this order is overrunning. But for the operator, they simply need to click here to see the next orders that are in the queue for them, select the correct order that they should be working on, and do what they need to do to change over to that order. So again, you don't want to be overproducing an order because you didn't get the latest version of the schedule communicated down to the shop floor. For our customers using this, it doesn't matter if their final schedule comes from their ERP or MRP software, or if, like most companies, they manipulate that final schedule in Excel. Whatever the source of that schedule is, we're tying into it and reflecting those latest changes right down to the shop floor. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to Dennis, who's going to talk about a couple final scenarios.
Okay, so another scenario that we see with our customers is that capacity planning doesn't get factored in correctly when it comes to OEE measurements. So, often we'll see a department with, say, 10 injection molding machines, and they're running 4 days a week because there isn't enough demand to run the full 5 days a week. So to get a better OEE score, they'll keep running the 4 machines because, the 10 machines 4 days a week because it's just easier. They don't really think about shutting down some of the machines and trying to expand to a 5-day week. So obviously, to run more efficiently, shut down some of the machines, make the hard decisions to maybe reduce some of the manpower in the plant, and then run 5 days a week. So our recommendations on this is to constantly be reviewing your fluctuating demand and try to match your capacity to that demand. We see customers that run blindly. In a lot of cases, they have no idea how much available capacity they have, and they run into a mode where they kind of unexpectedly end up running overtime on the weekends because they didn't fulfill all the customer needs throughout the week. So by having a visual graphical interface that at the beginning of the week, you can see all upcoming orders, you need to see how many hours you're going to have to run on every machine based on the historical rate of the OEE of the current machines that you have. You can see how many hours are left in the week and how many hours are required to reach your min and max Kanban levels of your inventory based on customer demand. So instead of waiting until Friday to figure out that you got overtime required on the weekend, why not see it on Monday and see that we have 18.4 hours on Complex 5 and 6.5 hours of contemplated overtime that is going to be required to meet customer demand. But we have excess capacity on Complex 1 and a little bit of excess capacity on Complex 6. Can we move some of this production around, balance the lines, balance the workload, and avoid running weekend overtime? So this is the kind of tools that we provide to our customers to make better decisions, balance the workload, and reduce overtime costs. And then I have one final scenario that I want to walk you through.
Can you go back to page 19, please?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. So the last scenario I want to run you through is the idea that OEE as a metric was never designed for complex assembly processes. It really is designed for standalone machines. So I'll give you an example here where you have a one-piece flow manufacturing line. This could be any line making pretty much any product with multiple stations feeding from one part to the next all the way through the process. When you see that your OEE is 47%, there's no indication as to which station or which cell is the major contributing factor to having such a low OEE score. Okay. So our recommendation is to adopt a new metric called the isolated OEE, which is a measure at the station level of how much constraint that particular station is putting on the line. So in isolation of all the stations before it and after it, how well does that station perform? So when it's not starved for parts or not backed up by the following station, does it perform the way it's supposed to perform? So here's how we would present that graphically. Your end of line OEE is 47%. And then you have that isolated OEE metric at each station. Score of 100 means that this station, in isolation of the rest of the line, runs at 100% of its targeted rate. It never slowed the line down. It never had cause for causing a hiccup in the process. The laser cell and the brush date stamp cells both run at a much lower isolated OEE metric, meaning that in isolation of everything else on the line, if this was the only station on the line, you would be achieving end-of-line performance of 73% OEE. When you couple that with the fact that this station is not running very well, you end up at 47%. When you look at a graphical view like this over a shift, it can fluctuate from shift to shift. But if you were to look at this over a 3 to 4 week period, you start to see the true chronic constraint on a cell. So if you're going to put continuous improvement activities against a line or a station, you want to make sure you're choosing the one with the lowest isolated OEE score, because unless you fix the constraint, you're not going to see much of an improvement on the end of line OEE. So that's, again, the recommendation is to look at isolated OEE in conjunction with your end of line OEE, so you get a better picture of how you're performing. So with that, I'll pass it back to Terry.
All right, thanks for that, Dennis. And just to recap, because we threw a lot of scenarios at you in this short time, the things we covered were challenges with OEE. You can throw a lot of labor at things to improve your OEE score, but if you do that without tracking your units per labor hour, you could get your costs completely out of control. So again, measuring that units per labor hour in addition to your OEE score to make sure you're actually being profitable. We talked about gaming the score. There's lots of other ways people game the score with OEE, but some of the common ones are not having realistic and challenging cycle times and excluding time from OEE. And again, things like having the ability to measure how are we doing with our best rate versus our ideal or target rate to validate that cycle times are good. If we've made improvements to the line, really looking at that metric over the following weeks to make sure, do we need to up our targets now that we've invested in improving this line? And of course, we're requiring supervisor or other level of access to use no demand reason codes. So if a decision is made to exclude time from the OEE, that's got to be made by somebody with the right clearance level to do that. Talked about running long batches to improve OEE, and of course, match your production to your demand and have a tool that helps you measure and improve your changeover times. Again, overproducing against orders, have a real-time schedule delivered to the shop floor and have alerts on progress to make sure people know when it's time to do changeovers. This can also help with your changeover times, having that visibility that a production order is reaching its conclusion. And as Dennis talked about just recently with the ineffective use of capacity, balancing your orders across your equipment, having that visibility of what work you have to complete in the week and what capacity you have. And finally, on complex assembly lines, using the isolated OEE metric to identify the true constraints so you can focus your limited improvement time and resources on the right issues. So we're certainly not suggesting that you throw out OEE, but we are suggesting that you need to have a solution in place that gives you a more complete picture than just an OEE score. There's lots of OEE tools out there. There aren't many out there that can give you the broader perspective of how you're really doing and are you producing profitably. And so that's really what we're trying to get you to consider there, is using these additional metrics to focus on running more efficiently. So we're going to go into QA now. I'm going to ask everyone to use the chat feature. And it's that little icon that you're hopefully seeing on your Teams toolbar if you scroll over the screen. Just to type in the questions, because there's a lot of people online and we'll avoid people talking over each other. And Tony, I know you had a couple questions or asked us to back up a couple times. I'm going to ask if you have a question you want to type in, that would be great. And while we wait a moment for questions to come in, I just want to let everyone know about a webinar we held a month ago about driving accountability in your plant and 5 habits of an efficient plant. And just to let you know that, like today's session, this session was recorded, and we will be sending out a follow-up tomorrow or the day after from this webinar. We'll include the recording of today's webinar, but there'll also be a link to the recording of last month's webinar if you're interested in seeing that one. It was well attended and lots of good questions from that one. So I'm going to go into the Q&A here, and just give me 1 second. Bring that up. Okay, and I have one question that came in just asking, Dennis, could you tell them a little bit more about the skills tracking from your labor rate example? And I'm going to take you back maybe to that slide if that helps.
Okay, yes, so I did kind of go over this rather quickly. One of the things that we tie into is what we call a proficiency tracking system as well. And proficiency is really what skills that individual has specific to the job function. So if you're in zone 1 on cell 33 and you're in the kitting process, there are maybe different training requirements than some other area of the plant. And so we have built into this not only tracking of who's on the machines, but we have tracking of whether they're qualified or if their qualifications are expiring or if they're not qualified. So this particular individual, Zachary M, is not qualified to run the job that he's doing. He does not have all the full training. And for a lot of our customers, tracking who's trained and who's not trained has become a major challenge. So the proficiency tracking module allows you to assign training requirements and then tracking who was trained and when the training was completed. And if it has to be renewed every 12 months, there is a expiry component to that as well. Now, when you try to move someone from one department to another, it's simply a matter of clicking on their name and then dropping them into a role. And when you do that, it will pop up a warning to say, this person is not qualified to do this role. Do you want to continue moving this person? The other option you have is to click on a person and then you can inquire, or sorry, click on a role and then inquire who is capable of doing this, who is fully qualified and trained on that. So then you can get a list of people that are able to do that job. So you can make decisions on how to move people around. So this is becoming a very popular module for us. And it's interesting because there are no real tools out there to track who's working what areas and what kind of training do they have in real time like this.
Okay. Thanks for that, Dennis. And I'll just call out to everyone online, if you have a question, please feel free to type it in. If you can't find, for some reason, the chat button, it's all right if you want to unmute yourself for a second and ask a question, but we'll keep the chat open for a few minutes. Oh, we have a question that came in just about how floaters can impact plant OEE negatively or positively. And this is from Satwinder. And Dennis, the question is around the idea of a floater that might be extra labor on a line. It might positively impact OEE, but it might, of course, add cost.
Yeah, that's a good question, because we do have a lot of customers that will have either temporary staff that they bring in every shift, or as you call them, floaters. You can do this one of two ways. You can consider the floater as extra personnel, and you don't put them into the OEE formula. And the role you call them is something like floater, so it's excluded from the manpower count. However, having visibility on how many floaters are available and where they are, and how many people are missing, it allows you to more quickly at the start of the shift make that decision where to put the floaters in if needed, if you're going to move them around to fulfill an actual process somewhere else in the plant. If the floater,
sorry, Dennis, I was going to say it's worthy of note that you could have a floater for cell 33 that they are split across zone 1, 2, and 3, and their costs can be split as a fractional employee as well.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
I was going to get, yep.
Okay.
But some customers choose to include that in their labor cost per piece. I would, because it is an actual cost. If it's a true floater and they're just filling in for washroom breaks and other breaks, then you should be including that in both their labor cost per piece as well as their OEE calculation.
Right.
Others choose to remove it because it's really just a role of an extra person just in case.
Right. And the other thing just to note is that within 10 and 6, I don't know about other solutions out there, but within 10 and 6, if your schedule for the day is such that you have one less person in an area, you can choose to lower the OEE target because I'm running with 2 people instead of 3 people. And you can, predefine that if I only have 2 people in the area, my OEE target goes down to this much. Conversely, if you're running with extra labor, you can increase the OEE target. And again, those are things you define ahead of time so that when you add in that extra person, you're measuring against the correct OEE. So Sadwinder, I hope that that addressed your question around there with a little more information. Any other questions? You're welcome, Sadwinder. He just said thank you. Any other questions from anyone who's on the line? We'll sit tight for a couple of moments here. All right, well, I don't see anything else coming in. Usually when Dennis and I do these sessions, we try to give people a few extra minutes of their day back. So I think we're going to wrap up here in a moment. If anyone's going to type in a last question, do it now. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend today. As we said, this is being recorded. You will get an email with a link to the recording that you can, share with colleagues, or if you want to go over any section that we covered. And I encourage everyone, and Dennis, I'm just going to take over the slides here. I just want to encourage everyone, we touched on some things in 10 and 6 today, but certainly if you have questions, info@10and6.com, or you can email myself, terry.depasquale@10and6.com. We'd love to hear from you with any follow-up questions. And otherwise, wish everyone a good day, and thanks again for taking the time to attend.
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, I've got one question here, Tony. I'll put up the last summary page right there. It was just a recap of the different challenges, and then the last summary page was just a bit of a recap. I hope that helps, Tony. And again, Tony, we will be sending a link to the recording of this, so if you want to have a look at any of the slides again, you'll be able to. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, everyone. Dennis?
Yes, I just want to say thank you as well. Again, if you have more ideas or thoughts, please forward them to us. Reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Okay, thanks, everyone.